would you please start and give your legislative update?
Well, thank you, Bobby, and good morning, everybody. Good morning, Corona. First, I wanted to acknowledge the Corona Fire Department and the great job and the fire service and all the firefighters responsible this week in combating the Canyon fire. I know it's still some remnants of that, but I think they're well on their way to getting rid of it. A great job. I know it's in the morning, and I know that you're just waking up, but I thought I'd talk about something that's very exciting, and something we're all involved in, and that's taxes. You might have heard on the news this morning and yesterday that we're rolling out a new unified framework. We've negotiated this with the White House and with the Senate to achieve pro-American, pro-growth tax reform. The framework, as envisioned, will create a new tax code. It'll be the largest revision of the tax code since 1986. It'll support middle-class family, defend workers, protect jobs, and put America first. We believe it will deliver fiscally responsible tax reform by broadening the tax base, closing loopholes, and growing the economy, basically flattening down the code. So if your coffee's kicked in, let's talk about it just a little bit. First thing, we're going to double the standard deduction. The framework simplifies the code, provides relief by doubling the standard deduction. Right now, as you know, the standard deduction is approximately $6,000. We're going to double that to $12,000. $24,000 for a married couple. Because we're doing that, a lot of the existing personal exemptions, the taxpayer and spouse are now consolidated into this larger standard deduction. I hope by doing that, many people will be able to do their taxes on a postcard. In combination, these simplifications effectively create a larger zero tax bracket. By eliminating taxes in the first $24,000 of income earned by a married couple, or $12,000 by a single individual. So basically, those are earning $24,000 or less, a married couple, of a zero tax rate. Under the current law, taxable income is subject to, we have about 7 tax brackets. We're going to break that down to 3. We may end up at 4 in the end. I'll be honest about that. We'll see how that comes along. But overall, I think everybody is going to be much better off. We'll increase the child tax credit. The first $1,000 will still be refundable as under current law. We're going to repeal the AMT, the alternative minimum tax. Those of you who have to pay that know you have to do your taxes in effect twice. It made no sense, so we're going to eliminate that. In order to flatten the code, we're going to have to eliminate most itemized deductions. So a lot of the itemized deductions that you presently have will no longer be around, except for home mortgage interest and charitable contributions. So we wanted to make sure those are obviously very popular. In this tax code, we're also envisioning repealing the death tax. So there would be no more estate planning. So you state lawyers out there probably don't like that, but that's where we're at. Small business changes. We're going to have a new tax structure for small business, especially pass-through corporations. Most of you probably are either subchapter S corporations or LLCs. We're going to drop the rate for those businesses to the lowest rate since 1931 to about 25%. This is to encourage 71% of all employees are under subchapter S or pass-through corporations. To encourage those businesses to expand. Framework limits the maximum tax rate to that, and we believe it's going to be very fortuitous to expand business in the United States. Corporate tax rates, we have the largest corporate tax rate in the world. No country has a higher corporate tax rate than the United States. We want to drop that down to 20%, which would make us just 2 points below the corporate average in the worldwide average. About 20% would make us extremely competitive in the world marketplace. Instead of corporations moving out of the United States, as they're presently doing in order to escape the high taxes in the United States, not only are we hopeful that they'll all stay here, but we'll start attracting many of them back. Some of the business provision allows business to immediately write off or expense the cost of new investments in a depreciable asset. So for those of you in business, you buy a copy machine or you buy a piece of equipment, you have to depreciate that over a period of time. You'll be able to depreciate that in the first year. So we'll get the specifics of that. There's a lot more specifics you'd probably like to see. Because of the framework substantial rate deduction, the current law, the so-called domestic productions, some of us that have been involved in this our lives, Section 199, that we have to deal with, will no longer be necessary. So domestic manufacturers will see the lowest marginal rates in almost 80 years. In addition, numerous other special exclusions and deductions will be repealed or restricted. So just to put this in context, how we reduce the rates, as much as we've done, we reduced the number of deductions. And so we simplified the code. And so probably a substantial majority of the U.S. citizens will be able to file their tax form literally on a postcard type of paperwork to send to the Internal Revenue Service. And I think it'll make life easier on Americans. They'll be able to keep more of their money. And we believe this will also lead to a potentially higher, 3% or higher growth rate in the United States economy. So you'll be hearing a lot about this. I'm going back next week. We intend to have this passed both in the House and in the Senate and on the President's desk and make it retroactive for the 2017 and have it done by the end of the year.
Listen, before I start, taxes are very, very complicated, and you can tell that our representative, Ken Calvert, really understands them. He's clearly been working very, very hard for all of us. You know, he's the dean of the California Republican delegation in the House. We can't have it any better than Ken Calvert. So how about a big round of applause for Ken Calvert? I want to hit some of the highlights of the legislative session in Sacramento. You know, Sacramento is all about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'm going to talk about the budget, which is some of the good, and I'm going to answer questions about the bad and the ugly in a bit. You know, I think some of you know that at the end of this budget year, we'll have about $8.5 billion in reserve, and in the budget year 2021, we will have about $12 billion in reserve in the state of California. It's the first time we have ever had more than $1 billion in reserve in the state ever. So while we do a lot of bad things in Sacramento, and I certainly know about them, the one thing that this governor and the legislature has been able to do is to start saving some money. Not enough, but it's a good start. Now, the budget's all about a fight, and it's a fight with the governor. He wants to take things out and does take things out of the budget that benefit our region, and we have to fight to get them back in. I want to hit some of the highlights of those. In the healthcare area, we directed, he didn't want to, but $546 million toward Medi-Cal rate increases. That provides more money for doctors, hospitals, and medical providers, particularly significant in our region. He took it out, but we put it back in, $100 million for medical residencies over the next 3 years. That translates into more doctors in underserved areas, and that means our region. We restored funding once again to what's called the Work for Warriors program. It's run by the military department. It's a job placement program for vets in the state of California. It has a 78% placement rate, and we have placed over 5,000 veterans in good-paying jobs up and down the state. We funded a study to expand veteran treatment courts throughout the state of California. These are the courts that take veterans with post-traumatic stress who run afoul of the law and give them another chance. We're sending a $4 billion park bond to the voters, to each of you, to decide whether you want to improve it or not. The park bond includes $1 billion to construct veterans housing, and it also includes $5 million for parks that are run by nonprofits, such as our local Citrus Heritage Park, and we're hoping to scrape off $1 or $2 or $3 million of that for improvements at our Citrus Heritage Park. We secured, the governor didn't want to do it, but we secured $10 million for the citrus industry to battle that tree greening disease that's spread by the Asian citrus psyllid, a battle that's going on right now in our neighborhoods as we speak. And as you know, last year we won the battle to have the California Air Resources Board's vehicle emissions testing facility. This is the testing facility that discovered the Volkswagen cheating scandal, relocated from El Monte to the University of California, Riverside. Thank you. We secured $413 million in capital cost money to construct that facility. The groundbreaking is this October, and we expect Governor Brown to be down here. And if you don't think that's going to attract other business to the community, it has already started. The businesses that do business with that vehicle emissions testing facility are looking to relocate in our region. Now, I don't know why they think they need to be in the armpit of CARB, but they do, and that's going to be good for us because the facility itself brings 400 to 500 new jobs to our region. Now, legislatively, we tackled housing in a package of bills this year, and among those bills, I'm pleased to say and proud to say was SB Senate Bill 540. It's a bill I authored. And what it simply does, by the way, it's going to be signed at 11 a.m. in San Francisco today. What it simply does is it streamlines CEQA. It allows cities and counties to take areas of land, parcels of property, and gobble them together. They don't have to be contiguous, and call it a workforce housing zone. Once the city and county or county does that, then they do one environmental review over the entire bunch of property. And once the environmental review is done and the lawsuits are finished, then developers can come in, submit their projects, receive approval within 60 days, and oh, by the way, the environmental review will be paid for with state money. We think this will shave 1 to 2 years off of the project development timeline, time being money, and put more housing on the ground right now. Now, finally, we were able to resolve 2 issues that were long-standing battles, at least begin to resolve them. One, you know, we have a shortage of judges, so in the budget we were able to direct 4 new judgeships to Riverside and San Bernardino County. Those judgeships will be on the ground starting in January of 2018, this next year. That's not enough, but I think we're going to have to wait till the next governor to fund additional new judgeships, but we'll be right there as soon as he or she gets in place and push that through. And lastly, with your help, your significant help, we were finally able to get the money to the 4 Riverside County cities that lost it in 2011. So all in all, from a budget standpoint, I think it was a pretty good year. We couldn't have done it without your support. So thank you very, very much. It's a privilege to represent you.
Thank you. Good morning. Well, first, I just want to thank the Chamber for inviting each of us to be with you today to give our perspective and update, and certainly look forward to hearing from you towards the end of this discussion. I do want to thank our fearless fire department and all the work that you've done. I certainly want you to know that our thoughts and prayers are with all those families that were affected this week, and to all those emergency response teams that were out there from across the state to respond as well. First off, Senator Roth, it's been a privilege to be able to work with him in the state legislature. He tackled the budget issues, so I won't touch on those because he highlighted many of those. So he worked on the Senate end, and I attacked it as well on the Assembly side. So combined, we were able to accomplish a lot together in my first legislative session. But as you know, I represent the 60th Assembly District, and Corona is the heart of my district. I actually have my district office right off of Main Street by the old Fender Museum. And I know Kimbler was just mentioning that there's going to be a coffee bean opening up right across my office, so I look forward to that. I know that we'll probably be making a lot of coffee appointments there. But I want to just highlight my legislative package, the work that my team and I have been doing this last 9 months. And I won't touch on everything, just with the time constraint that we do have, but I will highlight a few things. Our 4 priorities this year have been on jobs, economic development, higher education, public safety, veterans, and transportation issues. I am the chair of a select committee on veterans education and employment, and I'm going to touch on some of the work that we've been doing within that committee. As we know, Riverside County is actually the 3rd largest veteran population in the state, but out of the 5 largest counties, we have the 3rd smallest operating budget. And so we continue to see that our region gets underfunded, overlooked all the time. So what was a priority for me coming in is making sure that we do get our fair share. And through the budget, we were able to secure $2 million for the Norco Community College for a new Veterans Resource Center. First time ever funding. And this was the only new allocation to a community college in the state. There will also be a $5 million of ongoing funding for community colleges for VRF centers throughout the state, but that would be through a grant process. So I would invite you out to come and join us on October 25th. We will be doing an unveiling at Norco College. And it'll be from 1 to 3 o'clock will be my hearing, and shortly afterwards we'll have the unveiling. So please join us if you can. We want to make sure that Norco College remains a leading model for veteran services throughout not just the state, but the country. Some pieces of legislation that I do want to highlight. These last 9 months have certainly been fast-paced. Out of the 14 pieces of legislation that I did introduce, 8 of them are at the governor's desk. And so we are still waiting for those to be signed, hopefully by October 15th. But the other pieces actually turned into 2-year bills. And so that we could continue working on those as we go into the next legislative session. Touching on small business. I know we have many small businesses in the room, folks with a business background. I come from a family of small business owners, so the first thing I did when I was elected was go down here off 6th Street and knock on businesses' doors just to hear from them, hear what their concerns were, what they needed from us, their legislators. And one of the first bills I put across the desk was AB 162, tax cuts for small businesses. And this developed based off of not just conversations with our small business community, but with our economic development team with Kimberly. And I just want to thank Kimberly for all her work. She is a fantastic asset here in the city of Corona. And because of this, my bill is actually allowing more businesses to apply for this tax cut. And it's through the California Competes Tax Credit Program, where there's over $300 million available to small businesses each and every year. But we don't have enough businesses applying for this tax cut because of the threshold. And so we're opening that criteria up so that we are able to get more businesses that want to apply and they're attracted to this program. That is a 2-year bill. We're going to be working with the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development for my next legislative package, so we have a strong business package moving forward, and I look forward to working with many of our local economic development teams within my district. The other one that might be of interest to you is our Capital Access Loan Program. And that's my bill as it relates to assisting businesses with financing in accordance with ADA guidelines. So I know that Senator Roth had a series of workshops several years ago, and so we want to make sure that we're continuing to help our businesses with, they struggle with a lot of the finances, and so we want to make sure that we're enabling more small businesses to access these types of funding. And so that is also at the governor's desk. The other issue I want to highlight is transportation. I know we all have to deal with the 91 freeway, and my bill, AB 91, addresses the HOV lanes. Now, many of us know, if we've traveled through Northern California, the HOV lanes are 24-hour operation. In Riverside County, there is a small portion in Moreno Valley where it is HOV lanes. You're able to use those lanes during off-peak hours. Now, my bill would open that up to Riverside County. So the Department of Transportation will ultimately make the decision on what those off-peak hours would look like. That has also been supported by a number of my constituents here locally, from judges to just folks that I'm talking to within the community, expressing their frustration with the traffic congestion and what more we can do. So we're working with the California Department of Transportation, not on just this bill, but moving forward on how else we can help alleviate this traffic on the 91. Military families, how many families do we have in here, sons, daughters that serve in the military or that served? Thank you. I want to make sure that I highlight the importance of our veterans. As many of you may know, I have family members that have served, and I actually have a wall dedicated in my district office to our veterans. One way that we're able to help our veterans, especially the military spouses, is through teacher credentialing. We know that we face a teacher shortage here in the state, and my Assembly Bill 226 will allow teachers that are coming from other states that have already credentials in other state or territories to ease the process when they come to California. So they submit an application. Their application has to be reviewed within 7 days. This bill has been supported by the U.S. Marine Corps. They've actually been to Sacramento to testify on behalf of this bill. And this is just one way we can help our military families get back into a civilian lifestyle and make sure that they're able to provide, not just for their families, but to teach our future. And I would welcome any support there as we move forward. It is also another bill that's at the governor's desk that we're awaiting signature for. I also have a bill that would create a task force for women's veterans. So a health task force that could study the needs of our women veteran population. I've been in roundtable discussions, and one of the things that they have mentioned to me is that they feel that their voices aren't being heard, that there's lack of services. And so we want to make sure that we address that moving forward. But I don't want to highlight, go take up more time because we do have Q&A. But I just want to thank you all for your time. I know many of you in the room that I've met with personally in my district office. I look forward to continuing engaging with you and look forward to seeing what our questions in just a moment. Thank you.
So the first question that I have, and then I'm going to be bringing up Yolanda Carrillo, who is well known in the community representing the YMCA, but also on our board of directors. First question is for Congressman Ken Calvert. In the wake of the recent tragic earthquake in Mexico, many people in California and the West Coast are wondering why we don't have an earthquake early warning system like they do in Mexico and in Japan. I know that recently you were on Fox 11 talking about the benefits of such a system. Can you tell the audience what the status of the system is and what the outlook is?
We have a system we have a earthquake warning system that's under construction right now. It's highly complex. It's going up the entire West Coast, certainly more technologically advanced than what they have in Mexico and even Japan. We're learning from Japan and Mexico what we can do to make sure we have a good system. We want to make sure that the system we do put in works, and that the alert system, whether it's an app that's on your telephone or a number of alarm systems in urban areas, are put in, and hopefully we'll have this system up and operating within a couple of years. We've been under construction for a couple of years. And we have several thousand sensors already installed, but we think we'll have it up and operating soon, and it'll be very successful. Remember, the biggest thing about an app on this is that we got to make sure it's instantaneous, because you'll only be given sometimes a very few seconds warning. It's like what they had in Mexico City when the epicenter was only 7 miles from Mexico City. They only had 5 or 6 seconds. But sometimes that's the difference. So we want to make sure that we have the system up and operating as soon as possible.
Thank you so much. Would you like to comment on that too?
Well, I do. Ken Calvert's being entirely too modest. We can thank Congressman Calvert for the fact they were going to cut our funding in California for this early warning system. And we can thank Congressman Ken Calvert for fighting for us to preserve the funding for our system in this state. So.
Too, that the state has stepped up also and putting in some money, so it's a combined, so I want to thank Senator Roth. It's a combined state and federal project, and we should have this hopefully as soon as possible, but we want to make sure it works. We don't want to have a false system that gives us false hope, so we want to make sure it's a workable system. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I just want to thank you all for being here today. I know you have tremendous mandates on your time. So our first question today came from the community, sent to the chamber. Many times our employers are given regulations for their workplaces that contradict existing rules or lack a 1, 2, 3 implementation capability. How are you working with the enforcement agencies and the Attorney General to clear up these cases that can put law-abiding businesses unwittingly in gray areas? And here's an example of one. Prop 65 implementation agencies often require signage for materials they may not even be cancer-causing. So any one of you can jump in.
Well, you know, part of the problem is when we had 2,550 bills come through the legislature this year. And those bills were bills that had to be heard and voted on, and you would think there would be a lot of discussion. And sometimes there is, but a lot of times there's not. And while I would agree with you if you say, well, stop doing bills, I would be fine with that. I don't do very many. Unfortunately, that's not the way the California legislature works. Point of saying that is, oftentimes what comes out of Sacramento and the legislature is highly imperfect. Provisions are not deconflicted. Conflicts between one bill and another bill are not identified. And so what I would ask you to do is to help us identify those conflicts, and when we identify a conflict, then we can go back in and try to fix it. Ideally, it wouldn't occur in the first place, but as I said, it's an entirely imperfect system, and we're not perfect either, and we simply don't catch some of the problems. And we do create problems, and so when we create a problem, it's our obligation to fix it. So I'd ask you to work with us and help us help you.
Okay, thank you. Sabrina?
Can you all hear me? Okay, so I want to echo what Senator Roth did mention. Many of the bills that we see, there are a lot of conflicts, and so I do my best to meet with our business community as well as folks on the other side to get to a middle ground where there may be a bill that I may not be in support of initially based off of the concerns of our chamber, of our business community, but I want to make sure we get to a point where we can be effective together. And one of the things that I would like to hear from you is if you are a small business and you are facing challenges, even when it comes to certain regulations, let us hear from you because we can see how we can move forward in introducing cleanup language to previous language that was passed. And so we've seen that, I've seen that in the legislature this year. Well, I would love to see how we can continue working together, but that's also a reason why I introduced my capital access loan program and to increase that funding so that we can help our business community.
Okay. Ken?
Are you here? Okay. I just want to make one point. Sometimes a lot of businesses don't know that they're in violation of a law or a regulation because there are so many laws and regulations. I'll put one up that some of you may be familiar with, and that's the American for Disabilities Act. It's not just a static law. It changes all the time. Somebody decides they want to sign here or they want to change a width of a parking space or whatever, or the gradient of a parking lot, and they're not aware of it. And so they're visited by a lawyer, and they're told that they're going to have to spend a lot of money to pay law fees, when sometimes the fix is just a few $100s. So I think we can agree that we ought to give these businesses a reasonable time frame to fix the problem before they have to go out and start lowering up and spending money on things that have nothing to do with the problem at hand. So we're trying to do that on the federal level. I hope they do that on the state level. These small business guys, they just can't afford to spend $5,000, $6,000 paying off a lawyer for no good reason. So those are the kind of things we need to do that help business.
Okay, thank you. What is the prospect for continuing to lower the cost of workers' compensation insurance for employers? And I'll give you my own example. YMCA, we're almost paying $80 grand a month in workers' compensation. So I can't wait to hear.
Well, I'll try to tackle that. I think it was during Governor Schwarzenegger's administration that we had, I was not up there obviously, but we had some of the biggest attempts at workers' comp reform that we've had in decades. Cost containment, utilization review. The jury's still out on that, and obviously it's not really working. I can tell you from my perspective, when I chaired the insurance committee, I had jurisdiction over state fund. And I was surprised to learn that there's a dramatic difference in the premiums charged to employers in Southern California versus the premiums that employers pay in Northern California. And during a hearing, I asked the question, why is that? Well, I was told there's simply more litigation over workers' comp claims in Southern California than in Northern California, and that drives up premium costs. And I said, why is there more litigation? And apparently there are a few, I'm a lawyer, but apparently there are a few law firms in Southern California that are workers' comp mills, and they generate the bulk of cases that are litigated before the board. I said, well, why are claimants going to lawyers? Well, part of the problem is, in the case of state fund, I'm not banging on state fund, but at the time they had too few Spanish-speaking claims adjusters. And so if you were a Spanish-speaking worker, you couldn't get any service out of state fund. You had to seek a Spanish-speaking attorney to be the interface for you. The ball starts rolling, the litigation starts, and the costs go up. So I think until we figure out how to get folks in the field working for the workers' comp carriers that can interface directly with the injured worker to try to get the worker the care the worker needs, but not unnecessary care, which drives up cost, we're going to have a very difficult time controlling premiums in the workers' comp arena, Yolanda. And we all pay them. I had to pay them too. Hated it.
Because that's money that could be servicing our community instead. And it is going to attorneys, and that's really sad. Okay, number 4, what is your opinion on California becoming a sanctuary state? What does this mean for California on a federal level?
Okay. Ugh. Well, first of all, Senate Bill 54 is what Yolanda was asking about. It's not my bill. I think this. I mean, sanctuary state, sanctuary city mean different things to different people. I'll give you my perspective. I am firmly in favor of securing our borders. I am absolutely in favor of making sure that folks who are employed are documented. And I will give, and I've given him credit for decades now, on Ken Calvert's program, E-Verify. I'm a firm believer in that. Maybe there's still some difficulties that need to be worked out, but that needs to be used. There is concern in the state of California in various communities about young people who were brought here before they knew where they were coming, and concern in the communities about folks who've been here for 35 or 40 years who are doing the jobs, perhaps some of the jobs for you, working hard, keeping their nose down, paying their taxes, and they may or may not have problems with the documentation. So there was a move to put this sanctuary state bill forward by Senate leadership. The bill was highly imperfect, in my view, when it first came out. It prohibited ICE agents from, in essence, from interviewing folks who were convicted and in jail. It restricted the ability of the folks who run our county jails from notifying ICE of release of folks who were convicted of crimes that most of us would consider serious. But I think when you look at the final version of the bill that came out of the legislature and is headed to the governor, I think you will agree that the bill essentially does what we do now locally with law enforcement. It provides a 48-hour notification of release of convicted criminals who are going to be released from jail, and the list is frankly very, very, very extensive. Child offenses, assaults, batteries, DUIs, all of those folks who were in jail, who were convicted, ICE will be notified before those folks are released and given the opportunity to take them and deport them if that's what ICE decides to do. The bill, as it was finally amended and approved, at least by the legislature, permits ICE agents to go into county jails and interrogate the folks who are convicted and being held there. without restriction. So I think when you take a look at the bill, you will, and if you talk to Sheriff Stan Sniff, the bill essentially mirrors what's going on here in Riverside County, both at the county level and in the city level. It's probably still imperfect. We'll have to take a look at it, but it protects the people who some of us think need to be protected ultimately when Congress does the comprehensive immigration reform. Young people who were brought here before they knew where they were going, and folks who are here 30, 40 years doing the jobs that we all depend on, nose down, paying their taxes, not getting into trouble. It does not protect convicted criminals who are sitting in jail and need to be sent back across the borders. So I'm happy to answer any further questions about that, but I look forward to your input on that issue.
So when this bill was first brought to us, it was actually in the middle of this year sometime. Discussion started to get pretty heavy in Sacramento and here in my district office. I had folks from all sides, folks that were actively against it, folks that were actively in support of the measure. The Senate bill in its original form. And I shared my concerns to both sides. I was not in favor of the previous version of the bill. It did have many, many flaws in which issues of public safety were not concerned. It was very general. I also met with our sheriff. I met with our chief of police here in Corona and in Riverside. And so I connected with law enforcement at all levels and wanted to make sure that I had all the information I needed to make the best judgment on something this big, not just for my district, but for the state. We worked very hard to make sure that these amendments were going to be taken. I addressed my concerns to leadership as well as to my colleagues that shared some of my concerns. Now, no bill is ever perfect, and I think that that's something we all know, but we want to make sure that we are protecting those immigrants within our community that are going to school, that are in higher education, that want to remain here and give back to our economy. There are so many families that have been living in fear day to day. But we wanted to make sure at the same time that our community was protected. At the end of the session, this bill was amended to the point where the State Chiefs of Police Association removed their opposition. And they worked hard with the governor to push for their amendments. And I'm glad that the governor accepted those amendments, and so did leadership. This bill no longer, originally you weren't able to comply and work with federal immigration authorities. Now you're able to. And not only that, it also makes clarifications to make it clear that local law enforcement can participate with federal authorities in task force to fight crimes. This was one of the main issues that our sheriff had brought up in our local law enforcement agencies. We all know that these task forces are so significant and so important locally. We wanted to make sure that that amendment was taken, and it was. And it also amends to allow federal immigration authorities to interview individuals held in custody within our local jails. And it addressed so many more crimes that weren't addressed previously. And if you want a list of those, our office would be happy to provide you what those crimes entail. And just reach out to us and we can give you more detail as necessary.
Thank you, Sabrina.
The other side of the story. People ask me, you know, obviously I'm somewhat of a conservative on these type of things. What's your position on this sanctuary state issue is? Because I hear about it all over the country. In Washington, D.C., I am the senior appropriator in Congress. So we appropriate all U.S. funds, and some of my colleagues from other states are wondering why we should appropriate funds to the state of California if they are perceptually ignoring federal law. So that's something I'm going to have to explain to our colleagues, who are, by the way, neither Republican nor Democrat. They're appropriators who want to take the money and spend it in their own states, to be quite frank. You know, the old saying is that they like to California gets more appropriated funds than any state in the union, rightfully so, because we're the largest state in the union. So there's perceptions that we're going to have to defeat here. The reality is that some communities within the state will be more receptive to working with federal agencies than others. LA County has already said that they intend not to do so. We had a ICE operation here in the last 2 days. We picked up here in the Southwest 500 criminal aliens. That's our primary goal right now, is to pick up criminals. I don't think anybody wants criminals around. We've picked up about 45,000 criminals since the first of the year. We intend to pick up as many as we possibly can and get them out of the country. Nobody wants drug dealers, gang members, rapists, carjackers, all the rest of it in this country. We want them out of this country. And we're going to do everything we can to get them out. And we hope that we can work in a positive way. And I think there's going to be a lot of, especially in the rural areas, people working with us to do that. But I'm fearful that in, say, LA County or in San Francisco or some other regions, we're not going to have the same level of cooperation. But we'll see. We'll see how that works out.
My understanding is most local law enforcement agencies don't, as their primary mission, engage in immigration enforcement activity. They're focused on making sure your cars aren't stolen, that your houses aren't broken into, that you aren't robbed on the street, and that rapists are picked up and put away. Incidental enforcement activity, there's nothing that really prohibits that, in fact, in this bill. Most people's concern, I think, at least as has been expressed to me, is, well, if you have a convicted criminal in jail, why don't you just hold them until, after the notification, of course, hold them until the immigration folks can get there? And I'm not sure that I'm opposed to that. Unfortunately, there is federal law, and the federal courts have said that our county sheriff, Stan Sniff, cannot hold a person once his or her sentence has been completed in jail. It's unconstitutional, and in fact, you will be sued. That's what he's been told. And in fact, the case arose from, I think it was a case in Oregon or Washington, where a county sheriff was sued for holding a convicted criminal who was an undocumented immigrant who deserved to be deported. So we have a conflict here between what the sheriffs want to do and what the federal law currently allows them to do. And until that conflict is resolved, we're going to have to rely on the 48-hour notification and rely on ICE to come pick up people who need to be taken back across the border. So if you wonder why we don't hold people in our county jails until somebody can come and get them, that's the reason. Don't blame the sheriff. Don't blame me, actually, or Sabrina Cervantes. We need to fix the law and get the courts to issue a decision that allows us to do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Could we give a round of applause to our elected officials?